like Tom said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to build your task force, and then I'll be handing it off to Renelle and Mona, and they'll be talking a little bit more about the political process and how to hold your elected officials accountable. But I'll be talking about how do you begin and how do you start building your team. So first off, just what is a task force? I like to always kind of start off by just defining what is it that we're talking about. And what is a task force? Really, it is just simply a group of people that all have a common goal. They all have a specific thing that they want to achieve together. Sometimes a task force is called an action committee. Sometimes people call it an ad hoc group, a work group. You can call it lots of different things, but essentially they all have a short-term goal. Typically, it's a short-term goal of wanting to achieve a common goal. They just want to work together to get something very specific accomplished, get something passed, get something done together. And that group doesn't necessarily need to stay together once that goal has been accomplished. And so that's what we usually are talking about when we talk about a task force. But you might have also heard people talk about coalitions, ad hoc groups, committees, and all of those are really, they're all very similar. The only difference is that a coalition is typically designed to last a lot longer and to remain in place for over the course of years, potentially. Whereas a task force has a very specific, like, we've reached our goal, now we don't need to meet anymore. So some examples that you might have heard of or you might know of in the community already, the Traffic Taming Task Force in Flint, that is a group of people who are wanting to slow down traffic in the community. And so, that group may not meet anymore once they feel like they've met their goal of reducing the speed of traffic. There's Safe Routes to Schools teams, which we may or may not see a need for those. So we did have those established for a few years in different schools. We meet, we try to figure out what we need to in order to apply for a Safe Routes to School grant. The grant gets awarded, the sidewalks and things get improved, and now we don't have those teams existing at those schools anymore because the goal was to get the sidewalks improved in those neighborhoods. Safe and Active Genesee for Everyone. I know a couple of people who come to these sessions are actually members of SAGE, and SAGE is more of a coalition. So they do have a agreed upon goal, a mission, a vision that's all this, that everybody can agree on. However, that group has been operating since 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there. So that's a long-standing coalition versus a short-term task force that is goal-oriented. And then just things like food policy councils or health and wellness councils or committees, work groups, all of those things could potentially be called a task force. So a task force typically is changing what is into what should be, which you can also say is advocacy. So a task force a lot of times is doing advocacy work, depending on what it is they want to change. But I like to think of advocacy and activists and task force as really trying to turn what is currently taking place, what is currently the issue, what is currently the problem or the situation, and trying to change it into what it should be. And so why do we even want to start a task force? So a larger group, your neighborhood groups, for example, might want to establish a task force just to dig deeper on a very specific issue. Maybe you don't have time to address it during your regular functioning, during your regular meetings, but you know that it needs to be addressed because it's something that is impacting the work that you're doing. And so you may set up a task force or an ad hoc group. Typically, a smaller group can operate more efficiently than a larger group, especially if it's like a complicated topic or something that you really need to give a lot of dedicated time to. So starting a task force could be helpful for that. And then individuals who maybe are not necessarily interested in joining the larger group long term might be interested in joining a task group or task force or a work group or a smaller group for specific items or specific goals. So maybe they don't want to join the neighborhood group necessarily, but maybe there's a project going on that they're like, that's really important to me. I want to be involved. So then you end up getting the expertise and the input and the involvement of those individuals without them necessarily needing to commit to a longer term membership or participating for a longer term. Oops. So one thing I wanted to ask people here today, would you consider yourself part of a task force given these kind of definitions? Are you a part of a group that has a common goal? And do you think that that's a short-term or a long-term goal? And so I was just wondering if anybody here on the group would be willing to just unmute and share out. Do you feel like you're a part of the task force? I know there's a couple people here that I could potentially call on, but I really don't want to do that necessarily.
This is Mona. I've been part of the traffic taming task force and also the coalition to stop the Ajax asphalt plant.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you for doing that work. And I know that Eartha is part of a group.
Yeah, Frog, we're waiting on our sign to be put up at the corner of Pearson and Winthrop. But it's still over on the east side, I believe. And so we're just waiting on that. Frog is because we have some concerns about all the speeding that's taking place on Plymouth Road.
Okay, so you guys are interested in the traffic taming task force too. So
Yeah.
Frog, all right, so Frog is a really good example of your involvement in the traffic taming task force is a good example because Eartha is a part of the Frog neighborhood group, the Flint Residents Organizing for Good, but traffic is a major concern for them, so they've joined the traffic taming task force as kind of an extension of the work to get that done. So maybe it doesn't come back to your regular neighborhood meeting so much, or you don't do the work during the neighborhood meeting, but you have people who are part of that group going to the task force meetings and conversations and being active in that way.
Yes.
So one thing that helps when you're trying to just get your group together or get the task force together, if you haven't had one started, is figuring out why you even want to have a task force, why it's necessary for people to be involved. That usually is very helpful. Figuring out what is going to drive the group. So knowing what the problem is it a system? Is it some kind of policy? Is it a physical issue a physical built environment issue? Is it something like traffic? Is it something like issues going on at school? Really figuring out what exactly do we want to solve and why do we feel like this is important for our community? Do we want to deal with traffic because we feel like people are getting hurt? How do we know it's a problem? We've got data. Or how do we know it's a problem? We keep reading about it in the news. Maybe you don't have specific data and you need to get it. You can also just refer to, well, it's been in the news very often. We've had people ask about it. This is how we know it's an issue. This is why we know it's a problem for our community. And now we know we really need to dig into this and try to solve it. And that helps when you have a really good sense of why you're doing what you're doing, because when you go to talk to people about it, you can have a very straightforward conversation. You can get right to the point. This is what our group is doing. This is why we're doing it. This is how we want to take care of it. And this is why we think you could join. And this is why we think you would be in addition to our group. So those are really important things to get figured out right away. Otherwise, your group is going to be kind of floundering a little bit in the beginning to figure out what the reasons and what the why is. But if you have that all ready beforehand, it makes it much easier to convince people like, hey, this is important for you in your neighborhood, and we would love to have you be a part of this group. Oops, didn't mean to have the animation there. So for some of you, this might be a little bit familiar from the advocacy trainings that I've done before in the past. I always say, do your homework. this is critical to doing any kind of change work, any kind of work attempting to change your community, your neighborhood, even your own house. Is there any data? Do you have information about what it is that you want to get done, about what you want to get changed? Has there been any efforts to do it before? Really, like, knowing the history of the issue. If you're saying you want to get a policy changed at a school, find out, has anybody tried to get that done before? Do they have one thing we've tried to change before is like a policy for students who want to walk home. So finding out, like, is there a policy for walking home from school? Like, if there is, or if there was before, what happened? Why didn't it work? What were the barriers? What were the questions? Are there things that you can address so that you're not having to do that all over again? And you're not running into people saying, oh, well, we tried that last year, or we tried that 3 years ago. So just do your homework, find out what's been done already, and find out how what you're doing now is different. And so really just think about that, and think about, can anybody who was doing this before you, can you pick up where they left off? Could they join you too? Maybe they took a break because they got burnt out and there wasn't a lot of energy around it. Maybe they would be interested in joining you. Maybe you could learn some things from them too. Or is this like a brand new thing in your community that nobody else has ever heard of? How are you planning to get the word out? How are you planning to educate people on it? How are you planning to get all of this data? Which a lot of the data is reading the news, looking up information on websites, like the ones that we have in our community are things like State of Flint Kids, the Ruth Mott Dashboard, Speak to Your Health survey. So there's lots of options out there. It's just a matter of knowing, okay, what do I need to even find out? And then reaching out to your partners, like the folks that are on this call now. There's lots of resources in the community among agencies. So you could even just reach out to them and say, this is a health issue that we want to tackle with our neighborhood group, and we made a task force for it. And we're going to contact some of the health agencies and just get some information and some resources to get started. It's almost as simple as that when you're first getting started. And also find out who cares about this issue besides yourself. Oh, and then I did have Jane, I just saw your question in the chat, what's the difference, having a committee versus a task force inside of an organization? It really is just a matter of the naming. Some organizations, like the SAGE Coalition, we have work groups. I know Edible Flint, I think, had work groups. Eartha is part of a neighborhood group, but they're joining a task force. But some groups, instead of calling it a work group, some people call it a committee. But really, the difference between a task force and a committee is not huge. A committee can be one that's just for your group. A task force can cut across different groups. So like the traffic taming task force cuts across neighborhood groups. And so people from various neighborhood groups will join that task force, versus like a SAGE committee or a SAGE work group. People who are members of SAGE join, and that's it. And SAGE is a coalition, so we have people from various organizations. But essentially, if you're not a member of SAGE, we probably wouldn't be really asking you to join that task force, which is different than the traffic taming task force, which is a bit more open to the public. And they don't really, it doesn't really matter what neighborhood group or what membership you have in the community, as long as you're committed to reducing the speed of traffic. Does that make sense? Oh. Oops. So another thing I did have a little example box there. So things to consider when you're doing your homework. And I know you'll hear a little bit more about this, especially during Renelle's presentation. Some things to consider: you might want to consider doing a power mapping exercise, which really is just outlining who knows who and who has influence where. and figuring out who in your group has some connections. So really it's just laying out who's connected to who, what's your network, and then who has power or influence within that network. And so figuring out how to really use that, leverage that resource that you have as network, a social network, really. Who's friend of cousin of this person might know this person who works for, this person and sits on the board of that place. All of those people and all of those kind of social networks have different levels of influence. Even if your group has just a few people who vote, and those people have a lot of influence because they literally are voting. So it really can depend upon what the issue is that you're working on. That will change what the level of influence is per person or for social network. But, people who are going to be voting for an elected official, you might actually rate them as having a high amount of influence depending on the issue that you're tackling. So if you're tackling an issue that has to come in front of elected people, you might want to put the person who votes for them in the front, kind of like, hey, we have one of your constituents with us. That might actually influence them a lot versus having somebody from outside of their voting area presenting it, because they might say, hey, well, you're not a constituent. Why would I listen to that? You're not a voter, or you're not a person who's in my area that I work on. And then some other things, creating like an action plan, which we've talked about a little bit before, SMART goals, we've talked about those before, and really just kind of keeping really good details of who's working on what and how to contact those people too, especially if you are part of a group that's going across neighborhood groups, like the Traffic Taming Task Force. You do have to get very careful and detailed about how to get in touch with everybody, because maybe you don't typically all work together. So you might need to be just more thorough when it comes to that, especially when you don't typically work together. And then does anybody have any questions so far? I've only seen James put one in the chat, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm comfortable to answering questions as we go. So when to start a task force is also important, is knowing what's the timing. So you don't want to start a task force just because you want to work with those people, and unless you want to start a social network, which is a little bit different. But it's really when the larger group identifies that there is some kind of an issue that needs to be addressed that is going to impact that group, or that we can't move forward with something until this gets done, then maybe we'll start a task force. And a lot of times the task force is started because we don't have time to address that in this larger group, or it's just too much details or too much in the weeds, people often will say. Also, just when there's an opportunity to influence policy or system, or to influence infrastructure. So right now, I-475 has got some conversation going on around that, and there's some opportunity to influence what that looks like. So there's potential, a group of people could say, we want to start a task force because we want to advocate for a very specific change around 475. That's a lot of the time is the best time for that to happen. Or if there's just new information that comes up that impacts the community, or maybe there's new funding that's come up. So like the American Rescue Plan Act and the funding related to that. Maybe there's an advocacy group or a task force group or work group. Right now, we've kind of organically have gotten to the point where there's a group of people that are just asking questions about ARPA and wanting to know how the money can be spent. That group might turn into a task force because it's a short-term issue. The city, the community is getting funding. How we want to spend it. Maybe there's a group of people that are very focused on a very specific topic, let's say like education. And so they get people together who are maybe all educators, students, families, and they are working on how can we influence the way that this money is spent on education. So that's one way that might happen. And then when two larger groups want to collaborate on a project together short term, that you could also call that a task force. They have a one very common specific goal that they want to do, and they maybe want to work across organizations, but it's not going to last for a long time. So they may decide we're going to make a task force. And then you can, there's lots of other reasons to start a task force. So another part of this that is really the building your team. This is the kind of the title of all of it, but building your team. So when you're putting together your team, representation matters. And I know we all have heard that before, but it's really, really important when it comes to building your team of people who are going to be advocating for some kind of change, especially if it's going to result in a long-term change. Is really think about who's going to be impacted by this issue, by this goal, by this project, and how are they involved? Are they involved? Are you engaging them? And if you're not engaging them, then I recommend you got to go back to the beginning and think about, why didn't we reach out to people that are going to be impacted by this? And is this the right solution or the right intervention? But absolutely make sure that you have the folks that are going to be directly impacted by whatever the issue is, whatever the solution might be. They should be involved and at the table. And anytime you are creating a task force, I always recommend like coming up with some kind of multi-sector group, or a diverse group, a group that's got neighborhood group members, businesses, faith groups, law enforcement, nonprofit groups. The more diverse your task force is, the more resources you have at the table and the more creative you can get to finding some solutions for the issue that you're tackling. And if you can't get diverse in terms of businesses and faith groups and things like that, you might think about just being diverse in terms of the amount of neighborhood groups that are involved, which is very similar to the traffic taming task force. They have multiple neighborhood groups involved and not necessarily business owners and things like that, or law enforcement. They more so reach out to law enforcement and meet with them and talk about what they've been working on. So that's another kind of style that you can do, but definitely having a diverse range of perspectives participate is going to be critical to finding some solutions that are creative and that are long lasting and can reach different types of people and different lifestyles. Especially with some of the work that I do around like biking and walking and trails and things like that, it's important for us to have some diversity in terms of the perspectives so that we can understand the different ways that people move through the community, which is what I mean by different kind of lifestyles. Maybe people ride their bike, maybe somebody's in a wheelchair, maybe somebody is, likes to drive their car. So really having those different perspectives at the table helps us when we're coming up with some solutions around those issues. And then I included a picture of a high school class because they were actually doing some work around Southwestern and talking about the way that they walk and bike to school and what that feels like. Because include young people. That was one point I wanted to make sure I got across as its own point, is to include young people as much as you can. Not as an afterthought, not as just like a survey or like, oh yeah, we should get young people's input. Like really, especially if the project is impacting youth, if it's a direct impact to the way that students are being educated or getting to class or anything that has to do with youth, that it's directly impacting them, you can get creative, but including them is really the best way to come up with a solution that is going to be best for young people. Is asking young people what they want and how they see, how they see themselves within that system. And you can get creative in thinking about things like, can you partner with a school? Could you offer, could a teacher offer extra credit for participating in some of the activities? Maybe you want to get a class that goes to city council and reads off a letter. Find out, could those students get extra credit or something like that? Or even could it be an after school activity? How, depending on the the intricacy of whatever it is you're working on, and maybe that would be appropriate. Especially in those high school classes, you might find that some of the students would be really interested in that. And it may count for credits for them, or may count as part of the honor roll program for them. You never know.
Teresa, you did have one question in the chat as you get ready to wrap up. Jane asks, what is the difference between a committee versus a task force inside an organization?
Oh, I did try to answer that earlier, I think. Tried to address that earlier, but the difference between like a committee and a task force when you're inside of an organization, I would say there's not really a huge difference. The task force often is very goal oriented, and they have one specific goal that they want to address. And then whereas when you have a committee, your committee might have a broad range of topics. So if your committee is the communications committee, they may be focused on all the different aspects of communication for that organization, versus a task force, which maybe we have a task force that's for an event, and their task force is committed to communicating and getting the word out about a specific event. And once that event's over, they might not exist anymore. But for a committee, if they're focused on communications or event planning, they might have multiple tasks throughout the year, and it might be a standing committee. That committee isn't really planned to go away, is the difference there. And then I'll just say kind of my last couple of slides is just assessing your team, keep track of your members, keep track of, kind of their skill sets, their phone numbers. You can use a spreadsheet, you can use notebooks, whatever it is that works best for your group, but just keep track of that information, especially if you're working across different neighborhoods and things. People may not always know each other, especially when you're working across different groups. And then we say spheres of influence, or like your network. So who people know, that's helpful to keep track of. And I believe, and this is just an example, but I know that Renelle will be walking you guys through something like this, but this is just an example of power mapping, which you could do on a piece of paper during a meeting. You could do it on a whiteboard, a chalkboard, just be like, okay, who knows who? So Mike's mom is friends with somebody who works for the mayor, and they can get us in touch with them. Or Rachel is a voter, and her neighbors are also voters, and we want them to go. Maybe Dion knows somebody who goes to church with the city council member. So really just looking at who knows who, but I know Renelle's got an exercise that's going to be similar to that. I believe in the past, you guys have gotten some exercises for SMART goals too. So I don't think we need to do too much in depth here, but just making sure that you're really clear about what are your goals as a group. And then Jane, I saw you came off of the a mute. Did you have a question?
I did, back on the one before, thinking that we maybe should be saying to student groups that are organized, could you use me for anything, and joining their group rather than assuming that they will come in subs to us. And the other thing I was thinking was we might want to think about our organizations coming to life again after COVID. We all look and approach differently, and it's maybe an opportunity to revitalize our groups in a new way. I don't know what that looks like, but it seems like it's an opportunity.
That's a really good point. Yeah, especially for the groups when you're talking about doing outreach to other groups or to young people, find out if there's ways to integrate into what they already have planned. Especially I know like Honor Society, a lot of times we used to have super early in the morning meetings, 6 a.m., teenagers getting up super early which I didn't even, know that we did that, but I remember doing that. So some teenagers are very, very committed to this work. So they're definitely out there, but that is a really good point. And then my last slide here, this is my final thing. My final stay is to celebrate all of the success, celebrate the small wins, the big wins, the things that you think like, oh, well, we did it. Okay, moving on to the next thing. Nope. Take the time, be happy about the things that you've got done. It helps to motivate yourself, the task force, the group. You are making a difference. It's really hard sometimes when you're in the work to see the difference that you are making. So really scheduling time to say like, we're going to celebrate these successes that we've had can really help people. It also can help attract new task force members. People like to join projects and efforts that they see are having some success and are making some progress. You don't want to join a group that you're like, man, they don't have it together. But people are very interested in joining groups where they're like, wow, they're doing stuff, they're getting stuff done. Even if those things are maybe, are just leading you to your end goal, but it's helpful when people can see like, oh, wow, they're really committed. They're doing the thing, they're celebrating it, they're sharing, they're letting people know when the members are doing good work. They appreciate all the members. They're doing highlights of things. That is more inspiring. And so you might get new people to join because of that. And you can save some of these stories for grant writing and find ways to bring dollars into your group if that's necessary. Especially when you're celebrating those successes, you can say, oh, let's write that down because I want to put that in the grant application where we're applying for $5,000. I want to include that. So don't just skip over the successes that you have. And then you can also just use these stories to raise awareness about whatever the issue is too. Those small successes, those small wins or big wins. Sometimes you can get those even in the newspaper, or you can have, you can even just do like social media, just sharing with people, this is what we're working on. These are the issues. Does this concern you too? Then you should join our group. We're making progress. And so that's what I had for you guys today. Oops. As you can see, there's a break time scheduled. So thank you guys so much for letting me share, and I will hand it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Teresa. Are there any further questions or comments about task force? I think this is really important stuff, and I think that it's especially important. I was just on the phone with an individual who's a Flint resident before this session, and we were talking about this type of stuff and how and when to speak up and how to pair up with other individuals and groups. And so I think it's absolutely critical for the type of work that we want to do. So any questions or comments?
I would comment on how good these sessions are and how few people are using them at the moment, and whether the capsule of the work that you have all done can be a package that comes out as we put groups back together, as we come back together. It just, it feels terribly wasted for there not to be 90 people on here, and there would be if we were serving dinner at Sylvester Broom, probably.
Yeah, I appreciate
and we weren't
that.
ready to do that, but if there is a way to bring these pieces somehow, I hope you can.
Yeah,
you're good.
I truly appreciate that. Last year we definitely had more people, maybe because we offered some dinner. We sent people, I think we did Grubhub coupons last year. I don't know, maybe because everybody was in isolation and everybody was really hungry for some communication and some interaction. That might have been part of that. Maybe people are going back in person more. But I would love to talk more with you, Jane, if you are interested in kind of like giving us some feedback and stuff. That'd be awesome.
Will do.
Eartha has her hand up.
Yes, I found out that I think we're in low attendance because last year we actually suggested doing this after grant season was over with. Right now, people are actually hustling, getting the Habitat grants in, the mock grants are due, and the community foundation, and we're down to the nitty gritty. And that was one suggestion we made last year. Yes, the food was good, and I was wondering why we wasn't getting it this year. But anyway, but I think that's one of the reasons why we are in low attendance is because it is grant writing season time, and everybody is so caught up getting that done. So
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful to know too. And I think we traditionally were doing these before the deadline for the applications to kind of help and people be, inspired and connect and things like that before they go into writing. But we have the resident advisory committee for this project for Neighbors Changing Flint. And I know Tom, Michelle, and Trifina and I have talked about debriefing. We've talked about getting more creative about the way we get the information out and share. So we'd be happy to have people join us at those conversations just to figure out new ways to share information. Because I think we're getting to that point of needing to kind of approach it a little bit differently, possibly. Maybe it is hosting it afterwards now that people have kind of gotten the hang of grant writing a little bit.
All right, welcome back. Hope it was a good break. We are moving on to our first session, which is with Renelle Weathers from the Michigan League for Public Policy. Very thankful to have her here to talk about the political process. And I understand she has some activities for us, and so we'll have some good opportunities to have discussion and think about the political process. Renelle, take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see some familiar faces and some new ones. And please, this is a small group, so we're going to be interactive and more of a conversation. So please unmute if you want a question or put it in chat, as Tom had said. And so we think about the political process. Why is it important to understand the political process? You can put it, unmute or put in chat. Why is it important? As you put in that, as mentioned, I'm Renelle Weathers. I'm Community Engagement Director for the Michigan League of Public Policy. Previously, I have worked as a congressional staffer and a state of Michigan Senate staffer. So I have some background, various backgrounds. So you ask the questions, any questions you want, and even something that I won't discuss because political process is very big. I'm covering only a portion of it.
So we had somebody say politics at all levels impact our daily lives.
Exactly.
We have to understand and know how to use the political process to make change. I would say my answer would be, why do we need to know the political processes? So we can understand what kind of power and basically like what kind of power people have that are in elected positions and how to, make sure we're asking for what we need. Karma raised her hand.
Hi, Karma.
So we'll know how to make change.
Yes. And thank you all. Power making change is understanding the power, right? Talk about the political process. Who has the power, right, to make the change? We're going to discuss some of that today as we talk about it, and I'll focus on that part. How do we think about that? And just a little bit about MLPP. We've been around for over 110 years. We're actually celebrating our 110th year this year, and we, are committed to helping communities regardless of where they live, what zip code or race. So quick, I always want to give a level set, right? A civics review. I don't want to assume what people don't know. Let's give a brief level set, a little bit about federal and state, have a little activity, we'll go over the local process, and then we're going to have another activity about how do you make those connections. And Teresa gave a little tease. I really liked her power map. It's a little bit better than my example, but that's okay. I forgive Teresa for that. Okay, so the process of civics review. So, right, how's a bill become a law? I can't sing the song. Anybody can sing it, help yourself. But this is basically give you a sense of the makeup of the various bodies. And sometimes we forget about federal, but we're learning now with the Build Back Better's ARPA dollars, federal government has a lot of impact and can do a lot of impact on local communities, right? If money is allocated correctly, how it's intended. And so for our process, we have 14 representatives, and guess what, guys? We're losing one. So we're going down to 13. U.S. House representative, U.S. House representative person, and we have 2 U.S. senators. Can anyone tell me in chat who are our senators?
Renell, there was a comment in the chat that you're a little choppy, so I don't know if there's a way to clear up how people can hear you when you're speaking.
Is that better? Is there still feedback?
Sounds good.
Okay, so just let me know, and I will. What I'll do is sometimes I might be moving, so I won't move. I'm actually standing up, so I'm on a standing desk. So okay, I will try to make sure I don't have that. So can anyone in chat put on who are our 2, at least one of our 2 senators? One of our 2 U.S. senators, not your state one, your 2 U.S. senators. Just put one. Now, Gary Peters, Tom. No, I should have excluded Tom. I should have excluded anybody from the planning committee. That's okay. Thanks, Tom. Anyone name the other one? So in the United States House of Representatives, there are 435 seats that are voting, right? And of this, and there are 222 Democrats, 213 Republicans. There's a few open seats. That's how they usually lean. We need 218 votes in order to pass most legislation. And in the U.S. Senate, right, they're 50-50. So that's why and thank you. I think it's Michelle. Thank you for putting in there. Senator Debbie Stabenow is our second one. So most votes some of the votes takes 51, but in order to get those votes, the U.S. Senate has a special kind of process. It takes 60 votes in order to clear the path for a vote. And so that's what makes it a little unique, and that's why a lot of times things get stuck in the U.S. Senate. A lot of times, in most legislatures, it's called the upper chamber and the lower chamber for that. And you can't forget about, of course, the president who can veto. Now, our state government is really patterned after the federal. We have a bicameral system where we have a House and a Senate, and we have 110 state representatives. We have 38 state senators. And you see it, so you see the colors change, right? On the other one, it was blue, had a higher number, now it's red. So you have 58 leaning Republican seats currently, 52 leaning Democratic seats. But right now we have 4 openings. So right now it's 55 House members means in the seats, and 51 Democrat. And so right now they need 54 votes to pass legislation. In the Senate, it's 22 Republican senators, 16 Democrats, and there's 20 to pass most elections, pass most bills. Why is it important to know those numbers? I guess.
So you know how many people you need to influence to get your vote through?
You're getting close. Yes, that's one. So who has the majority has the power, right? So knowing how to count is really important. So math, tell all the young people, knowing math is really important because who has the power? So who has the power to make sure legislation gets to the floor? Who has the power to that this gets to committee? It is the majority power. But because we have divided government, the governor has veto power, and that kind of helps some legislation, helps a lot of compromise happen. Okay, so how a bill becomes a law. I'm gonna go through this really quickly. Please ask questions, and Teresa will send you a PDF of the slides, so you'll have this. And oh gosh, I forgot. I'm gonna show something. I'm gonna show you guys a video. It's a 2-minute video before we get to this. Our staff came up with something. I really love it. Okay, so first there's I say first chamber, second chamber. A bill can start in the House or they can start in the Senate, right? So the first chamber introduce the bill, they go to committee, then floor action. And once it passes one chamber, it goes to second chamber, it goes to committee action, it is floor action, and then the government decides the vetoes. Who decides what committee it goes to? Hold on to that. Just hold on to that. Just think about that. Think about that for a minute. So bills get introduced, get influenced. Introduction of bills influence various things. When I was in the state Senate, it could be a constituent who had an issue. Wow, that makes sense. Let's get there's an independent office called Legislative Bureau Services, and they actually write up the bills to check. Most bills have something to do with past bills. They have to check the boilerplate and see if there's any boilerplate language to see if there's any kind of connection or relationship. They have to include that in it. But the governor, staffs, interest groups, lobbyists, constituents, business groups, they all can influence bills. Those are influencers. And there's a bill drafters. You have the House physical staff, Senate physical staff. They're independent agencies. They actually let you know what they're going to cost. You have each chamber, House and Senate, and each caucus, a Republican and Democrat. They're called caucuses, and they have staff in each of the chambers. So there's a lot of people influence how bills happen. But guess what? You can too.
I was about to ask that. Renelle, you stole my question. I have my hand up. I was going to say, so what you're saying is that we could potentially inspire a bill if we're connecting with the right folks.
So and you have to know your representative. Google is great and have these meetings. Actually, observing their social media, so you kind of get a sense of things. Because there's some very strong groups who actually will write a bill and try to get a legislator to actually introduce it. Many of them don't like that. They rather have the opportunity of writing it. If you just kind of get their interest, right, and do that. So you have to know the person that you're trying to influence to do that. Either you bring the idea and they write it, and sometimes you can have a collaboration where you actually write it. And I tell you what, many corporate lobbyists actually help write the bills. And just for FYI, my husband is a recovering corporate lobbyist. Just to let you guys know, we had an interesting few years, guys. About interesting 7 years for that. Okay, so leadership. So who are the decision makers? I had a question. Who decides what bills could actually, what committees they go to? Who decides that? Leadership. You have the Speaker of the House, Majority Leader in the Senate, right? Those two decide. Whoever the majority party, the Speaker of the House represents the majority party, which right now in our state House and Senate, they're Republicans. They decide what committee it goes to. If they don't want something getting voted on, it doesn't get voted on. Unless there's always exceptions. There could be something that there's a lot of pressure on, but the majority of the time, it doesn't get to committee unless they actually doesn't get out of committee unless they actually want it to vote on. So think when you have committee chairs, where will it go? And have it. So these are people that are decision makers. Committee chairs then decides if it's going to be actually taken on the vote in the committee. Then of course, don't forget the committee vice chairs. The minority party has a vice chair, and they could be a best ally to understand to be strategic partners on how to actually make this stuff happen. And then other influential members are appropriation chairs. And Teresa just went over a lot about task force. The state government has a lot of task force. They are created under the government. So task force members are also influential folks.
And Renelle, we have a question in the chat for you.
Okay.
Jane would like to know, how does a citizen know about these decisions or how they can be influenced? So how do people find out about this?
Well, I guess a few slides, a few slides I'm going to help you know. Now, and I am open to come back to a longer presentation, Jane, for you and your group, because that's probably like a 2.5 hour thing where folks actually go in and do the work, because that's the only way you really remember these things, actually go in there and do it. So I'd be willing to do that. So in the committee process, that's where you can really influence. You can have testimony like this week in the state budget process. They're taking public testimony, right? Before they had hearings, it was basically departmental information, data being presented. But they take testimony, and then there's amendments, substitutions, and then the committee releases it to the floor. Floor action. When it goes to the floor, there's amendments, debate, and then the voting. And these are all steps that people can influence. Now, when there is disagreement in a bill process, whether it's regular bills or budget, whenever there's a disagreement, only items of difference. Oh shucks, sorry, I hit too many buttons. Items of difference. They have a conference committee. Who decides who gets on the conference committee? Speaker of the House and Majority Leader, right? Now, the minority party can recommend people, they usually take them, but guess who has the most members? It's the majority party, right? And then the governor signs and vetoes. And once it gets there are no amendments. After Congress committee, there's no amendments can be accepted. They vote on it with the majority votes, and then it goes to governor. And the governor can't, and you can override the governor with 2/3 of the vote.
Yeah.
Any additional questions?
Can I just write one thing?
Yes.
Mona,
Yes.
did you have a question?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was unmuted.
Oh,
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Okay. And be sure put them in chat. And Teresa, I should have heard her. What's the dog's name?
Penny.
Who?
Penny.
Penny.
Yeah.
Okay. They're in chat, and they're gonna.
I'll keep an eye on the chat. Penny doesn't have any questions though.
Penny doesn't have any questions. Okay. Penny, look. Make sure Teresa's doing it. Penny. Okay. Legislators. So, how do we find them? So we talk about who has power and who makes decisions. Many times, the legislator, even if they're not that represent you, even if they're not in the committee, you should make sure they're aware. We're going to mostly focus on folks on the various committees that you are identifying that your bill is into, but making sure that your representative is aware of what's happening is also good. They can help strategize and let them keep them apprised of what your steps or strategies are, and especially first you want to make sure that they support it. Definitely make sure they support it. For that, we can go on more if you ever want to get more into those effective advocacy things. So just for this is an exercise you guys are going to do. You're going to have 5 minutes to do this, but we'll give you. We're going to put the information in chat for that. So you go to house.mi.gov and you put in your information, and you get to find your state representative. If you already know your state representative, then I want you to find their committees. So if you go to, say I picked Sarah Anthony, and if you go to just meet her, you see the committee assignments are here. So they usually are very easy to find. And so those are 2 things that of the activities that you will be doing next. And let's go to the Senate. Same thing. It's Michigan Senate. You can find them by name, by address, or by the map, right? And when you find them, you can do the same thing that you did for that. So you can either do the Senate, and I'm gonna put another thing in chat for the Senate. This will take you directly to that page. Okay.
I've got them in the chat.
Okay, great. All right. So before you start, we haven't started the countdown yet. I want to show you. So this is not for the activity, but it's just for you to know. Jane asked the question, how do you find out about bills, what's happening? So at at legislature.mi.gov. Can you put that in chat, Teresa? Legislature.mi.gov, right? Go that, and you can get all the committees, you can get records, you can get notified on the bill status. You can be notified when a bill by a category. So there's many things that you can do in order to find out. You can find out if there's a committee, Health and Human Services Committee, or if there's something else. You can sign up. You can get sign up or cancel. You can get a record of. You sign up to get the meeting emails whenever there's a meeting on the issue. You get all that, and all this tells you. You can find out what happened, what was introduced, what wasn't, session schedules. You can go and see the committee hearings. This is all public knowledge, and almost every hearing is available to watch virtually online. Right.
And Renelle, I will say, Jane, I've used this before a few times to get updates on a bill about slowing traffic. So there was a bill introduced to make it easier for local units of government to lower the speed limit and so that was a bill that we had been following for a little bit, and it got stuck in committee. But this is really helpful if you know the bill number, or even if you don't, you can look up the content, right?
And you can get notified when anything about that content comes up. Now, I want to be careful. Make sure you're as specific as possible. You don't want to be inundated with a whole bunch of emails. And guess what? All you can email me, and I can help you through that and give you the right links, what you want to know. Okay, if I want you to have that, James, you can find out what just passed. You can find out the daily record. There's so much information that's available that you can find. You can just, it can be overwhelming. So I just want to remind you that to make sure you are more specific exactly what you want. And I can definitely help you with that. So your activity, you're going to find your leader. And so identify your state representative, either Senate or House. And once you have that, and if you already know them, then Google and find one piece of information besides their government role, like what they used to do, that kind of thing. So find your identified representatives, committee assignments. But if you already know who they are, then give me a piece of information that is that information about them besides what they do for the government. And so 5 minutes. We will come back. So when you get them, just put them in chat. I can't sing, so I won't do that. But I could play some. We could play some music. My husband has Temptations. Been Temptations in the other room. He's a big Temptations.
Do. I don't think anybody wants that either.
No. If you have any questions, put them in chat. So put one of these three things in there: the state representative, committee assignments, or something. One piece of information besides the government role. If you are coming here now. Now, I think base your district district numbers may change, but a little bit different, a little bit changes in the starting next year. All right. So we have something that he co-sponsored. All right.
I couldn't
find something that is not part of his government role.
Found it.
You got 2 minutes. Okay. So then Neely. Okay. And part of understanding what committees they're on, they may be on the committee, the very committee that your issue has been sent to. So understand what committees they're on are very important. But if they're not committees, as I mentioned before, keeping your representative in the loop is really key. They're the ones getting hearing information, help you strategize, then you know what's going on, what's not. When I was a staffer, we many times had folks come in and they were going to testify. We could tell them, what to expect, also help them with the questioning, help them know what's going on. And so the office can be very, very helpful. Hey, okay, Michelle, you're the first person to have something outside of if I remember correctly, outside of what they do for government. Thank you. Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to go because I want to do one more activity. I want to quickly go over the budget process and to share why. In the budget process, majority of the major decisions are made during budget process. So understanding how that works is really, really important. So I'm gonna share with the state and Genesee County and a little bit local their cycles. You can have a sense of how you can influence and timing for that. Thank you, Trifina. And a lot of times, understanding what their committees they're on can help you start a conversation, right? Beginning that, having that, sometimes sometimes you have cold calls, you never talked to them before. This helps with that. Put in the chat if you've ever talked to your representative or communicate with them, and just say you spoke with them, or just say you spoke with their office, or say you communicate with them. Let me know in chat. Okay, budget process. So in state of Michigan, okay, I'm going too fast here. In the state of Michigan, and these budget cycles are 360 days a year, right? That's why the cycle. The governor released her budget last month, right? And then it went to the governor proposes, the legislature disposes, right? So now it goes to the legislature. They either can start with that budget, the government may start with their own, but they have to come up with those numbers. And because it's divided power or shared power, you can call it shared power. There are compromises that have to go. So you have to actually pay attention to what that the governor has as priorities. And so right now we're in February, April, right? All the subcommittees are meeting. The subcommittees about each department has a subcommittee. They start meeting, and then it's April to May. They pass the budgets, and then goes to the floor, gets voted out of the full appropriations committee, and then it goes to the floor. As I mentioned, any differences, they have committees, and those committees vote. In committees, they vote, and then it goes back to the floors for simple majority. And then June to October. So they try to have it done by July because of the education process. Their year starts July 1st. So this year, what they did is the education budget was done, but the rest of the budget wasn't done until later for this current year. Who knows our current fiscal year? It's the same as Genesee County. What's the state and Genesee County's fiscal year?
I'm on the planning team. Can I guess? June, October?
You said which one?
Is it?
Say one.
June.
So October 1st is state of Michigan, and the Genesee County is October 1st to September 30th. The city of Flint is July 1st to June 30th. And the thing is that what happens between June and October, or when September starts, whenever they get it finalized, and even before then, departments are then planning for next year, right? So in September this year, the department are going to start planning the 2024 budget. So this is why it's year round. Genesee County. So understanding how this works also tells you at what points can you actually influence, right? So you can actually influence departments before the governor releases the budget, right? After governor releases the budget, then it goes to the committees, your representative. How to do. So we do have a link, and I'll show it in a minute. We have a link on our site that gives you a kind of a cute little way of talking about it. But things you can do at each stage, and these things you can do are also appropriate for all levels of government. Genesee County, right? Your organizational chart. Understand how does that flow work, right? How does that flow work? How the residents, who they elect. Do you know who your county commissioner is, right? Know who your judges are. People forget judges are so important. They're so important because if there's a law that they disagree with or something, it goes to the courts, right? So it's really important to appoint judges as well. Okay, Genesee budget cycle, right? In March, Finance Committee has the first finance meeting. They have revenue estimate conference. So does the state government. They have revenue estimate conference in January and May. And then June, draft the budget. Public hearings in July, right? Are you prepared for that? Are you listening to that? Departmental hearings, final budget August, and then budget adoption September, right? So if you know these cycles, this gives you an idea of how and when to that you can influence. Flint has a strong mayor type of government. Those weak mayor governments. There's so how does that work? Flint has a strong mayor government. The Flint budget cycle. What's happening now? In March, the council establishes the vision of goals. April, the mayor proposes budget to council. Public hearings in May. June, city council adopts. City administration and staff implements budget. July 1st, it starts, right? And it goes all over again. So understand the cycles is really important. Any questions? I'm gonna do a quick escape out of here.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to share, I put in the chat, we are going to be sharing Renelle's slides. So if you want to, get a closer look at those graphics and things, you will have those to be able to do that.
And ARPA is a different animal. So and so ARPA is a different process, but it's still a budget process issue, right? So understand that. So this is our website, and can you put mlpp.org on the website and budget basics, and we have a little video. And so here, if you touch on it, tells you things you can do, right? What you can do, find out who's on the subcommittees. So all these things that you can do as well. So each one there's a interactive guide here of what you can do, all the different processes in the government. So I'm gonna show this video, and it's only a couple minutes.
We can't hear anything, Renelle.
Oh, hold on.
Is the audio off?
Okay, I'm going to. Okay. Stop share. Okay, share screen again. And
Teresa, will all the links that you added in chat be sent out in the email, or how should people?
We can do that. I'll save the chat.
We're going to talk about the budget cycle and what you can do to make sure your priorities are included.
Yeah, can you start it over?
Make sure your priorities.
And Trifina, I'll get those together for the email that goes out.
Hey, Michigander, did you know the state budget supports all the things that make the Great Lakes state our home, including housing, childcare, and healthcare? Most importantly, the state budget supports the people here. Today, we're going to talk about the budget cycle and what you can do to make sure your priorities are included. From October to February, the governor and state departments begin to prepare the budget. During these months, it's a great time for you to build relationships with your state legislators. In February, the governor releases her proposed budget. Make sure to sign up for budget alerts at www.mlpp.org. You can continue to contact your state legislators, as well as build partnerships with others in your communities that are interested in the same priorities. From February to April, appropriation subcommittees in the House and Senate meet to craft their own versions of the annual state spending plan. Find out who is on the subcommittees and when testimony is scheduled at www.legislature.mi.gov. This is the best time for public input, so provide testimony or communicate with subcommittee members and your own legislators. In April and May, the subcommittee budgets move through both the House and the Senate, with possible amendments at both the committee level and on the floor during final debate. Continue to contact your state legislators about your priorities and portions of the budget that you support or oppose. During late May to early June, joint House and Senate conference committees meet to iron out differences between the budgets passed by the House and Senate. Conference committee changes are sent to all legislators for final approval, but amendments are not allowed at this point. You can find out who is on the conference committee at www.legislature.mi.gov. Talk with these individuals to ensure your priorities are heard. The legislature must present the final budget bills to the governor by July 1st. She can veto specific items. Contact the governor about items of concern to you. The final budget must be signed by October 1st, and then it begins again. This was presented to you by the Michigan League.
Cool. And I'll make sure you have links to this, because on this page has the ways to influence, all the kind of thing, icons. It goes to the actual information. So kind of give you kind of what I said, but in a kind of a better visual way. Okay. So it's also important to know whose jurisdiction is it, right? So many times people have these issues and you're thinking it's state, but it may be department, because once the state House or Senate pass a bill and it's voted on, it becomes law. Departments really have the power of implementation, and how they implement it. Those rules they use are as important, more important than actually passing the bill, right? Because they can really allocate stuff inequitably, in an equitable way, or they can do it in a way that's as intended. So understanding jurisdiction is really important, right? So what's federal, what's state, what's local? Answer those questions is really important. Understanding that for that. Influencers. And so as we talk about all the people of power, well, how do we influence those people of power? Right? We do it like we do anything else. They're people, right? And they're influenced by religion, what's happening in the landscape, right? We know all the rhetoric that's been going on, right? So sometimes their fear of actually going out on a limb, right? So that the landscape kind of influences them, family, jobs, their faith community, constituents, right? And money is there too, but people actually can influence more than money if they actually go. Because when you go to legislators and you voted for them, they pay attention. Okay, I'm not saying they'll change, they'll do something, they'll listen to you. You know, doesn't mean they'll do it. 12 calls to an office. I don't mean to get into advocacy though, but I'll say this: 12 calls to office can cause people start thinking and looking about. I'm still do some calls like, hey, what's going on? Find out what's happening. What's that about? Right? People think that you need a whole lot, but that actually cause a conversation. And then, but you have to plan follow up, right? And so when you a goal, a result without a plan is a wish. So how do we actually put in the plan? And Teresa went to that earlier. So who are the decision makers you need to influence? Is it local, right? Is it state? Is it federal, right? Who are those folks, right? City council, the county commissioners, the department heads, right? Those things. So one way to think about it, and Teresa had showed one, a more local one, but is understanding power, right? If we're not having a power discussion, we're not having a discussion about change, right? Any discussion about change includes power. Who has the power, right? How do we shift the power, right? How do we open doors to get more power to others in this conversation, right? And part of doing that is giving people the information, right? Giving people the information of how to do it. That's another way of actually making sure people understand that they are needed in this process. And so when you think about power mapping as have a center, but how are they basically probably can't call centrally, but maybe I know my neighbor may be sitting on the pew with them at church, right? Maybe the board member of a nonprofit I'm at actually knows them. They actually may have given them money. So how do we think about it, right? So thinking about indirect, not direct things, but indirectly, how are they influenced, right? Who has the power? Who has their ear, right? This actually works. She mentioned, Teresa mentioned task. You actually can put a task force in here, and you want to create and put in there like, how do you create? Who needs to be a part of it? The task force, right? And also one group I talked to, they actually do it for fundraising, right? How do you get it? So there's many ways to use this tool besides this, just FYI. And so I like to do 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Who knew Kevin Bacon was actually only 4 degrees from MC Hammer, right? So sometimes we don't think about how people are connected. And Teresa, when you get this map, you can enlarge it. But it's because of Charlie Sheen, right? Knows Kevin Bacon. It's actually 3. And so can't touch that. I think Charlie Sheen was connected to that as far as financially connected to that. And then Kevin Bacon knows him and vice versa. So powers, and then you have, let me go back. And then you have Justin Timberlake, right? And even, sorry, my hands are going crazy. And then you have,
sorry, Renell we're having a little bit of audio issues, I think, again.
Okay. I think who knew that Tiger Woods or Justin Timberlake were connected, right? So sometimes we think out of the box, right? How are people connected? And so we're going to do exercise together, and in about 3 or 4 minutes, just to have you start thinking about this. And these are something that was, yeah, I think that was, yeah, the last thing. So let's do this. So this is an example of a mayor, right? You want to do something, say for instance, ARPA. This is an ARPA example. You want to influence the mayor. Who does it? Chamber of Commerce. But who specifically? Don't just put the Chamber of Commerce, right? Who specifically? This has to be specific, right? Not just a group, right? Local businesses. What businesses? And then I mentioned board members, right? And then you have political donors. Who gave money to them? These are all public. These information is all public information. They have to file these. And then pastors, right? And then of course city council influences it. And sometimes it's not connected. So these board members may not be connected to the mayor, but their board members may be connected to local businesses, right? Or the organizations, nonprofits. So how are we thinking through this? Okay. So you guys ready to do something, a really quick exercise? Just to throw something out. So I'm going to go to a document. Move it over here. Let me know if you can see this. Can you see it? Okay. So who is your target? Either put it in chat and Teresa will tell me, or let me know. So let's pick one target. Who influence you want to influence? And say it's the mayor, okay? The mayor. Mayor Neely. Did I spell it right? No, it's without the E, right? Is that right?
I think it has an E, right?
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. So who's connected to him? Go ahead.
Does anybody, I'm trying to think, does anybody know anybody who knows somebody who knows the mayor? I feel like a lot of people know somebody who knows somebody who knows the mayor.
Right. I mean, I know what do. I mean, people, the neighbors, you probably, I wouldn't ambush them at a grocery store. Those are times you can say, hey, I really would love to talk to your team about something. Those are things to do.
Yeah.
do something, just a gentle hello, I mean,
So I will say, I know April Cook Hawkins, who is a consultant to the mayor.
so
I know April, she is my neighbor and also a consultant for the mayor.
and so she's a consultant. I'll put something on there. Okay, I guess we're a consultant. Okay, April and anyone else? Consultant. Her name is also April.
Tom says Brian Larkin and Lynn Williams. So Tom, do they know the mayor? Is that what you're saying? Oh, they go to his church. Okay. So Shiloh Church. So Mona says Mayor Neely goes to Shiloh Church. So he is connected with Pastor Daniel Moore, Lynn, and William. Pastor Daniel Moore.
My spelling's horrible. Okay.
So the mayor goes to Shiloh Church, and Brian Larkin and Lynn Williams go there.
Okay, and so this would be so we would actually, let me put them over here. That's a connector instead of just a connection. So and just to think about it. So these are folks that are connected there, and Lynn Williams.
Yeah.
Oops, please.
Yeah, Brian or Tom said Brian Larkin and Lynn Williams, they go to his church.
Okay.
So the connector is the church, and then the
right. So once you get this together, so how do you actually get the information to them to actually make sure they influence the mayor, right? So making sure you educating folks, having their elevator speeches, whatever they have, right, and get their buy-in for the support for your particular issue, right? So thinking about that and how you have that together.
And Trifina said Clyde Edwards, who is the city administrator. Karma Lewis, Deb Hamilton put Karma Lewis.
Okay.
And what I like about this format that you have is like you could do this on a piece of paper, a napkin, while you're having coffee. You could do this almost anywhere. Really, it's just who knows who.
Right. And so then what's the plan? So this is part of building that plan. And then once you have that plan, so how do you make sure these people actually influence where you want to influence, right? I know they all may not agree with what you want to do, so you have to make sure that who actually can get to influence the mayor at that redundancy, right? At the echo chamber. How do you add the echo chamber where they're all saying the same thing, right? And doing that. Okay, those are quick pieces I want to share. Okay, for that. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but just more of a comment about the power mapping stuff too. Though the example that I showed also had an element to it where you basically can kind of rate how influential that person might be. So you can also add that layer to it if you want. You don't have to, but that is another way of making it a little more actionable when you get ready to go to build a team or come up with a plan. You can kind of look at, okay, who's got a higher rate of influence, who has a direct connection, and what tasks, do you want those people to be assigned to based on how influential they could be.
Right. And these are folks that take them out lunch, right? Or just, meet for, tea or something, or have a virtual conversation, right? Let them know these key issues and just, and bring them into the I'm losing my train of thought.
Into the fold.
Into the circle, right? And actually, you're creating an informal task force, right? Of folks who actually, but the echo chamber is so important because many times people go to a decision maker, like official, they may have 10 things. What's the one thing you want them to do, right? And we all champion different things, but what's that one thing we're working on right now that we're coming together on? And because many times decision makers try to divide you and have you like, well, don't you work for so-and-so? You know, what issues do you want? No, I'm here today for this issue. You will make sure you keep focused because, you know, they can get you divided and conquered, right? You want to stay focused. When you're actually approaching it. Okay, but so that's the presentation. I try to stay within the time constraints. Do you have? Teresa knows that we can go do this forever. We can do this for 2 days. But thank you so much. Really appreciate your attention. Actually, you guys, you know, actually engaging and sharing information in chat. Really appreciate that. So thanks a lot.
All right, thanks for coming back and joining us. We're in the home stretch of this evening's workshop. I'm very excited to have Mona Monroe Eunice with us. I've worked with Mona in various iterations. First, I think when she was at U of M Flint, and she's been doing a great job in the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative at the City of Flint. And I believe she's wrapping that up this month and is formally going full-time for her environmental justice nonprofit, which is called the Environmental Transformation Movement Flint. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mona, and she's going to talk about holding elected officials accountable.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to start at my slideshow. Give me one moment, please. While I'm setting this up, I just wanted to share that I'm going to be speaking from a couple of different perspectives. One is an environmental justice lens, because that's the lens from which I do my work. And that's my background. And then the other perspectives I'm bringing are from both working at the city and community advocacy through the environmental transformation movement of Flint. So can everybody see this okay? Okay. All right. So holding government officials accountable. So just really quick, I wanted to share that the mission of the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint is to grow diverse environmental justice leaders and just relationships to secure a healthy and sustainable future by and for Flint residents. So we catalyze informed democratic planning, equitable investment in Flint. We want to bring green jobs here and environmental solutions to lift people up out of poverty and create a healthier planet for our generations to come. So part of what we do is, you know, trainings like this, and we're going to have be rolling out another training with a cohort model for environmental justice leadership development, and also we do direct issue advocacy. Why do we need to hold government officials accountable? Well, there's kind of two main things. One is to make sure that our leaders are leading with integrity, that they're following through on their promises. And then the other thing is to make sure that we have a really democratic system that's responsive to community needs, and that, you know, elected officials and also people who are appointed or hired into government institutions know that they are there to serve the people and they're operating in that way. I want to really ground my talk in the 17 principles of environmental justice, particularly number 5. And I'll just say for background, the principles come out of the 1991 First People of Color Conference at the national level, which helped to really kind of define the environmental justice movement more clearly. And one of the fundamental principles was the environmental justice affirms the fundamental right to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination of all peoples. What does that mean for us in Flint? That means that we should be shaping our own community, right? For our own health and well-being. So our needs as a community come first, and we want our government to be reflective of our community needs. So So you're going to hear a little bit of repetition with what Teresa and Renal have shared earlier, but I'm going to give the perspective of, I'm going to use a case study from the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint, or I call it ETM Flint, and that's our work with the Ajax Coalition, the coalition to stop the Ajax asphalt plant. So you're going to hear that as a thread throughout my presentation, and I just need to remind my 6-year-old to be quiet for a moment. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing you want to do before you start talking to government officials is take a moment to try to understand the issue. And you really want to get to the root issue to make sure that you're identifying what you need to shift in the community and who you need to influence, and that you're identifying the correct solution. So it's just something I always remind people, and you want to do your homework, see what kind of data is out there or where the gaps are. And then that will also help you to identify who else you need to be talking to really build your case for the change that you want to make and to really understand the issue. So with the Ajax case, what happened was that in July, the state of Michigan issued this proposed project summary for Ajax Materials Corporation to get an air quality permit, which would allow them to build a plant like this, shown on our flyer. This is a hot mix asphalt plant, and we were really concerned, and I'll talk more about it in a minute, about the health impacts for our community, for particularly where they were deciding to put this. So this was the start of a huge coalition that has been built across faith institutions like the St. Francis Prayer Center, which is next door, Greater Holy Temple, residents around the surrounding area, both in public housing complexes like River Park, and we've engaged folks at Ridgecrest as well, and then families who live in the immediate area as well, and then other churches, groups like the Michigan Poor People's Campaign, their local chapter, Michigan United, Flint Rising, Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint, and more. So we've had really a big coalition because we knew we needed to mobilize and influence these policymakers as quickly as possible and stop this permit. Okay, so once you have a clear idea of the issue, what do you want your decision makers to do? You really want to take some time to think about what is the best solution and the difference between an activity, a program, and a policy. So an activity and a program, those are kind of like day-to-day functions, and policy is getting to the root of the issue. What is the fundamental underlying issue that needs to shift in order to have the outcome that you want? And so one analogy is this idea of a dandelion. Are you going to mow over it? You're going to just cut the top off? That's kind of like policies and programs. And it's all important work. But in some cases, you really need to dig at the root and just pop that weed right out of the lawn, right? So for the Ajax plant issue, we knew that there were two things. One was that there's this kind of structural issue around zoning where the plant was going to be located technically in Genesee Township, but all the effects would be on Flint and Mount Morris, which are the most heavily populated communities around the plant and also are predominantly Black and low income. The other thing that we knew that was an issue in this case, that was another root issue, was this issue of cumulative burden. It's an industrial park that already has an incinerator, a coatings facility. There's all this industry along Dorr Highway. Just north on Coldwater Road, there's the Marathon plant. There's just so many concentrated sources of pollution in that area. And so we were also making the case that the state could not just look at, as they do usually for permits, they just function by saying, well, let's look at the added environmental pollution from this new facility. Well, what they need to understand in a context like Flint is that there's all this background pollution. And so they need to be thinking about cumulative impacts of the existing pollution and the additional pollution. So understanding the solutions that we wanted have influenced the next step, which is identifying the decision makers that we need to influence. So for the Ajax case, we needed to put pressure on the EPA, for example, to put pressure on the state. We needed to put pressure on the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to say, you need to use the law that's on the books that allows you to assess cumulative impacts when you're making decisions on the permit. And we knew we needed to put pressure on Genesee Township's Board of Trustees because they had approved the zoning plan back in the 80s that continues to cause a risk for Flint, because every time they are welcoming an industry, it's going to be located across from Flint and near Mount Morris as well. So again, all of these, what I'm kind of doing in this presentation is posing questions that I would recommend you kind of think through as you're building your campaigns, and then that will culminate in understanding how to put the pressure on. You want to get clear on what you want and now who you need to influence. Now, I know we've already seen some power maps. That should just tell you how important this kind of a tool is. I'm just sharing with you one more. This is one that I used with, I learned at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. It was developed by the Detroit Community Academic Urban Research Center, and has been used in trainings, including in Flint. When I worked in the School of Public Health in Ann Arbor, we partnered with CBOP and train people in how to use this power map tool. So this particular one asks the questions: who has the power to make our program or policy change? Who are the key players with a stake in our issue? Where do they stand in terms of our issue? Are they supporters? Are they undecided? Do we need to inform them about what's happening? Are they opponents? And how much power do they have? So it creates kind of a grid. And this, I just made it very simplistic. Like, we knew that after some initial conversations with Eagle staff, that they were kind of our opponents in this particular case. I always really advocate for using an inside and outside game. So you want to be as positive as possible. I think Renelle said, decision makers are people, and you don't want to alienate anybody. And so your first line of defense to influence government officials is always to, if you can, it's not always possible, but if you can, take the kind approach first. But quickly, we realized that they really weren't willing to do much to address our community's concerns or budge without threats, like a civil rights complaint at the federal level. We also put pressure on the governor and Michigan Attorney General, who were initially undecided, and then we kind of forced them to take a position. And the Michigan Attorney General did consult with Eagle and actually ended up backing their permit. We knew that there were Flint City Council members in our area who actually worked around River Park, either in a council person capacity or in a capacity of having worked, in the area directly outside of their council work. And we knew that they would be friendly to us. So they were supporters. And of course, we have residents, right? And what they could do initially when we were doing a power map like this is really be able to start getting attention for the cause. So this is very simplistic. You would go much deeper. And I think, like Renelle said too, you want to be very specific. You want to name the names of specific people, but it's a great tool to think about who you want to influence, who are your allies, who are the opponents that you need to be ready for, and to be able to have your messaging ready to counter whatever narrative they may be putting out there. I also want to share two other tools, one being an asset map. It's really important that we build from strengths, because if we take a deficit model, it's very draining. We want to be as inspiring as possible. And when we build from strengths, we actually can achieve more faster. So these are just two examples. I've done a similar one, just very visual. When I worked with youth at Home STEM Academy years ago, we were planning, it was like a garden project. So you could even be thinking beyond what you see here on the screen. A lot of times with an asset map, you're looking at businesses, your faith community assets like parks, different groups, individuals with specific talents or connections, cultural spaces. And you could also be thinking in doing this kind of activity in terms of what radio stations do we have personal connections to, who in the media would we want to connect in with this issue? Just really thinking about all the facets of what makes up our community and how we build that network together. And then the other tool I would highly recommend people try and practice is having your elevator pitch. Because if you get 30 seconds with your policymaker that you need to influence, you need to have your message ready to go. Hey, I'm Mona Monroe Eunice. I'm from the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint. I'm really concerned about this Ajax plant. It's across the street from Flint's largest public housing complex, where people already have are already telling us there's high rates of cancer and asthma, and we want to make sure that they're not burdened further. We know that we need to stop this permit, and we want your help, and we would love to have a meeting to talk with you about it further. 30 seconds, you're done. You extend your invitation. You've said who you are, what's the issue, and you pull a little bit the heartstrings. Why do you care about it? Why do other people care about it? What do you want done? And what's the follow-up? So that's a great tool. I've worked with this in different spaces, and sometimes it's really comfortable. Like I've said, I've shared that elevator pitch 100 times. But when you're starting out new, it can be more challenging to think about, what do I want to say? So you just kind of sit with these questions, and then sometimes you just write it out and you practice it in front of a mirror, or you get a coffee with a friend, or you have a virtual lunch date with somebody and you just kind of practice it together, and it gets easier. Okay, so now that you have these tools, you've done your power map, you know what people you want to influence, you want to start thinking about what motivates them. Is it, oh my goodness, are you going to make it through the next election? Is it votes that matter? Do they care about visibility and awards? Do they care about being seen as an expert? Do they care about how a specific subgroup of the population thinks of them? Do they want to be in the limelight or out of it? And you can also think about elected officials versus government staff, because they're going to have different motivations. Most staff members aren't really going to care about votes, right? Other than having a new administration, it doesn't really affect the day-to-day. But what might matter to them is having good credibility in the community, and have their name associated with something positive, or just, being able to put their head down and work and not really being in the limelight might be something that motivates. But for somebody who's elected, they need your vote. I will tell you what, we are leveraging the Ajax case around, we just have to think about how we put pressure in different spaces, and that could, just how you get visibility can make a difference in a broader ripple effect. Do they really care about being the expert, or being seen as like the most powerful leader? So you just want to start to think about what motivates them. You can look at other speeches that they may have put out there if they are elected, or highly visible government officials. Or you could just ask around, leverage your relationship with other organizations. What do you know about this person? What's their take? How do they tick? It's helpful to just understand them. And then you want to establish rapport and relationship. And I make a distinction between these two. Rapport is that kind of feeling of connection and being friendly, that initial friendliness. And the relationship is a deeper level connection. So you want to start by establishing rapport and then building a relationship. Find what they care about. Then you can find out too, where do they stand on your issue? And also, if they're hesitant to accept your solution, find out why. I've heard cases where people in our community have been told, no, you can't do that. And then you talk to the person and they're like, well, I'm really concerned that it will cause this health issue or this safety issue. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it might give you insight on, okay, now I understand that person's concern and why they're not budging on my issue. What can I do to have my policy solution or my program solution or action get listened to and considered, but also resolve their concern, so we can just get over that hurdle and really move in a more positive direction. The other thing I would say is you want to be respectful, thoughtful, reasonable, and open-minded. I've seen at the state level and also at the local government level, when people felt a community member was being like really unreasonable in their demands, that they just started to tune them out. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's right, but you just want to be mindful that you're talking to another human being. And it may be that you're not going to establish a deep relationship because the other person just really isn't responsive. But I really recommend starting with trying to build that relationship and keeping it as positive as possible, because in the long run, it will serve you well. If people have a response to shame, and if they feel like they're being attacked, they are going to go into a self-preservation mode. And again, it doesn't mean it's right because that should not be guiding their decisions, but they are people. And so again, start with that relationship building. I also highly recommend we document. Okay, do you hear somebody make a promise and one that you particularly want to track and make sure it gets followed up on? Document it. When did you hear that? Who said it? Where were they? Document where, when, what they said. And, if you were in a space where, like, say, a Flint Neighborhoods United meeting and a community issue is discussed and a government employee says, okay, we're going to do the X, Y, and Z. You can follow up and say, okay, when is that going to happen? When should I follow up with you if they said they're going to do some homework or something? You want to get as specific as possible and document those conversations. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking, well, you can't document everything, right? Obviously, we can't document everything. But if it's a particular community issue that you want to make sure you have every duck in a row so that you can be really powerful about it, you can go to city council and say, this person said this, and they were going to follow up by then, and I haven't gotten a response, and I've tried to contact them. It's more powerful if you have it documented. The other thing I've seen is that, and this is a particular example, somebody had said, well, I had this conversation with this other person and, in this government body, and they said they were going to do this. And it's been, a couple of years because of COVID, and I've heard nothing back. So then you go talk to that person and they're like, I have no recollection of that conversation. You don't know if they just truly forgot it. You don't know, they're like, I don't recollect it. You don't know if the conversation ever happened. But if you have it documented, you have a much stronger position to go to and influence that person to say, this is what you said. This is the date. This is where you said it. This is, I have documented this. And then it's a lot easier to hold people accountable. Also assessing, like, what have they promised and what have they delivered and what's the gap? And what laws or policies exist to support your case. And then I also recommend documenting any media articles that come out on your issue of concern, any private conversations that you have, or quotes that you could use. And one example I just want to give here on the right, this is a screen image of the public comment that was submitted by the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center and Earth Justice, which they're a legal team, a big part of our legal team for the Ajax case, submitted on behalf of the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint, St. Francis Prayer Center, and Flint Rising, where we basically documented, here are the community concerns. Here is where the state law says that there is, law on the books in Michigan that would allow the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to use a cumulative impact analysis before making a permit. And it lays out, like, the case, and it talks about dates and all of the hiccups that happened with, like, Eagle holding a public hearing on election day last year, which we pushed back on. We said that is you're just intentionally or not, you're limiting public participation. They're like, oh, well, there's nothing that we can really do. We just, we have to be fair to everybody. We can't hold another public hearing. So then we threatened a federal civil rights case, and all of a sudden they could do a new hearing. But because we knew the history of, in the incinerator case, they had to also do a federal civil rights complaint, because the department was doing these very same things back in the 90s. Having that information and having it documented helped us push for change. And it actually also helped us push the state of Michigan, particularly Eagle, to extend its public comment period 3 times. They were supposed to end in, it was mid-August, and we got to push them into almost the end of November of last year. And what that allowed us to do is have a lot more public participation, a lot more conversations, a lot more reach with the news, that the Ajax plant was being proposed. And we got over 400 people to actually submit public comments, which is pretty amazing for any permit. And then we had thousands of people sign petitions. So I'll get more into that later. But again, the documentation helps support your other actions. Of course, you want to build your power base. We've talked a bit about this already. So power can look like speaking with a unified voice in a coalition, as we talked about, a task force, a partnership of allies, being able to mobilize 30 people to come to a public meeting like that, that's power. That's also, just as an aside, what we want to do in the environmental transformation movement. As we train people, we're building a network of environmental justice advocates and people who have had experience and are trained in environmental justice advocacy, so that when something comes up, we're not scrambling to organize. We know our allies, we can pull people together, and we can show a force, a critical mass to put that pressure on and be a force for change. Power can also look like how many phone calls a government official gets, how many emails, letters, petition signatures, how many op-eds call them out or highlight the issue of concern, how many media stories there are. It can also look like having credible data to back up your case and preparing a clear message and distributing it widely in the community, like through one-pagers, flyers, fact sheets, things like that. So again, you really want to have your message down and be able to mobilize. This picture here on the right is actually a mock funeral that we did in Lansing on the steps of the Capitol. And those 2 boxes say, "Rest in peace, air quality," and they contain all the petition signatures, and then to the governor and all of the public comments that we collected, and other supporting documents like the EPA and HUD actually submitted letters in opposition to the permit. So we collected everything that we thought would be relevant, and we delivered 1 box to the governor, and we delivered another box to the state attorney general. And we got a lot of press out of doing this mock funeral, with a series of speakers that had a really clear message. So again, we're still working on this permit to stop it, but the more that you can generate visibility, the better. The other, just as an aside, one of the things I learned in this case is if you really have an issue that you want to power up the base for, try to make it cross-cutting. So out of this Ajax case, we are talking with folks in Detroit and Saginaw, Benton Harbor, just all over the place who have shared concerns around the issue of cumulative burden. These are communities that have a lot of industry concentrated and are creating health impacts. We can fight these issues individually, or we can say, hey, this is an issue across Southeast Michigan. This isn't just one of our communities or another. This is all of us affected, and we need this deeper policy change to happen. If we're going to protect, our families here in Michigan, if we're going to really claim that we're pure Michigan, we need to address this issue of cumulative burden. So you could think about, and the other thing I wanted to say is that the more you get that broader visibility and can link your issue here in Flint to people in Detroit and other places, the more media beyond Flint will pick up the story, and that gets heard differently in Lansing. So again, it depends on who you're trying to influence in government, but it's a really important way to keep the pressure on Just a couple more slides. So I wanted to talk about some more specific strategies for keeping the pressure on. And the biggest thing I would say is be the persistent squeaky wheel in both public and private. I talked earlier about you want an inside and outside game. You want the inside game where you're talking in private settings, or you're working internally with those who within government who can make the change. But the outside game is this when you you get the message out through the media, you do the rallies, you have marches or protests that are really like forceful and get the message out there. Sometimes when you're able to work within, you get some insights about where the sticking points are. Where are people at inside government? Where is the resistance if you're facing resistance to your solutions? So it's really important to have the inside and outside game. The other thing you could do in terms of an inside game, invite your decision makers to your group meetings or hold a special meeting to meet with them. You can also, if they have open office hours, go meet them. Have people trained and ready to go with your consistent message. Hey, we have 5 people showing up to these office hours. They're going to listen. They're going to be paying attention. It doesn't always have to be 30 or 100 people. But if you're persistent and you're really, and again, I would just back up and say, I don't want you to be overwhelmed. It really depends on what you're working on. If you have something you're trying to shift that, sometimes working with government officials and employees, it doesn't take a lot to influence them if you show up a few times. But then there's other campaigns where you need that really sustained pressure. And in that case too, I know Teresa said this, I'm going to echo it. It's really important to claim and to celebrate your wins, because you're going to need your energy, and you have to take care of yourself too. You have to maintain the energy. And I also would say, and grow other leaders too, so that the burden, it does not always fall on such a small group to do these kinds of sustained campaigns, right? And so the other thing I would say is, if your diplomatic strategies aren't working, sometimes you have to make the decision maker uncomfortable, right? You tried the inside game, you've tried the relationship building, and you know what? The only thing that's going to shift this is we're going to take some legal action. That's just a reality. I would say, keep in mind, in our community, we don't always have a lot of deep pockets, but there are other allies who do. But there's also great resources like the legal services of Eastern Michigan. There's like for us, for our environmental issue, we have a pro bono legal team. We could not have legal, we would have a much more uphill battle to have legal support without that. So there's a lot of different assets that you can build on if you have to go that route. You also might have to put pressure on, are we going to vote this person out? And then negative press, obviously, even in general, can really influence. So if you can build on strengths, that's great. Try that first, but sometimes you just got to take some hard action. I just wanted to share a couple of examples about what we did with the Ajax case. I call it learn as we go organizing, because as much as we have a really strong coalition that's very, very experienced, you are always going to be shifting and reassessing your strategy for how to put that pressure on. And if one thing works, you keep going with it, but sometimes you just have to adjust course on the way, because you don't really know how somebody in government is going to respond. So some of the things that we did, this is not all inclusive, but first we really mobilized to raise community and government awareness about why this plant is a problem. Why do we don't want it where it is? Again, we're not saying don't have an asphalt plant, but that's not the place to put it across from low-income families in the largest public housing complex in Flint. That is the wrong place for it. We had petitions and protests. We pushed hard in the media. We had a lot of conversations in our curriculum to make sure we were not doing things just for the media, right? But we definitely leveraged the media in our relationships there. We pushed on Eagle to improve their public input processes, which got them to hold a new public hearing, push their public comment period out by months, and other adjustments along the way. Like we were really pushing them to have an in-person outdoor location, which they wouldn't do. So we facilitated making it happen at River Park. Would have been better if they did it, but if they're not going to, we will. We did do some lobbying, asking the governor and attorney general to step in and stop the permit. We advocated for local, state, and national policy change around zoning, the permitting process, and this issue of how the EPA and the state treat cumulative burden of multiple facilities. We are pursuing an air quality monitoring grant so we can collect more data. We need baseline data on what's happening with the current air and what could happen, to see if there's any change or what the change is after Ajax. They're building their plant. We're still fighting it hard. And we also are suing the state to stop the permit. And we have administrative complaints at the federal level under the 1964 Civil Rights Act against Eagle and Genesee Township because we believe their practices are discriminatory. So just as a recap, you want to hold government officials accountable. You want to clearly define the issue. You want to pin down the best solution that you want to advocate for. Use these advocacy tools like a power map, asset map, elevator pitch. Then you want to identify which decision. Well, let me pause. Some of these, they don't have to be in this order, right? It's gonna be iterative. You're gonna adjust along the way. You might already know, starting like from scratch, who is my decision maker that I need to influence, and then you might do more of like an asset map or define your elevator pitch based on who it is. So it's not like these are real linear. But anyway, so you identify who your decision maker is, identify and build relationships with your allies and the other strengths in the community that you can leverage. Find out what motivates your allies and your decision makers and how to make a link between their interests and your cause. Nurture relationships with the decision maker. Document the promises, the communications you've had, any other relevant policy information or like state law that you can lean on. Build your power base and keep that pressure on. Then don't forget to, along the way, grow your leaders. You want to really build the capacity of the community to do more organizing by growing other leaders, helping mentor people, practicing self-care so you don't get burnt out. And that also means distributing your tasks fairly, so it's not all falling on just a couple people. And celebrate those wins, large and small, because they energize you, but they also show your power when you can claim your win. That's all I have. I'm going to stop talking so much, and I'm happy to take questions, or we can just keep this conversational. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mona. So any questions can unmute, or you can type them in the chat.
I don't have, your little square moved. I don't have a question, but I do want to say thank you for doing the work that you're doing, especially around the plant, the Ajax plant. That's really important.
Thank you. Yeah, we're not done. When I was putting this together, I'm like, oh, it's not like we have this signed, sealed, and delivered. We're still, I mean, this could be a multi-year, realistically, a multi-year case.
And that might be, and that is something, a good point to raise too, is that sometimes this work takes a long time, and sometimes it's a lot of back and forth. Sometimes you feel like you've made progress and then you go backwards and you have to go forward again. So, don't give up. And that's why that celebrating is so important. And then Tom, I see Eartha's got probably an actual question.
Go for it, Eartha.
Yes, I have a question. Is there property in Flint where the plant could be built that would not affect any residents' health? I see so much empty land around here. Is there someplace else that the plant could be built where the jobs could come in? Because I remember somebody made a comment in one of the chats or that those people just don't want any work in Flint, They don't want the plant because they don't want to work. They just want to stay on aid, was the comment that was made.
Well, what I actually found from going door to door and talking to people this summer at River Park was that there were people who wanted the plant because they felt that there was going to be a promise of jobs. But the reality is for an asphalt plant, you don't even have probably 20 people. And what they typically do is they bring in people that they've already trained from they have 6 other plants in Michigan. They probably will bring up people from other plants, and it's not really going to result in jobs here. But the health impacts that we stand to face are significant compared to the very, like, literally handful of jobs that it might create. I would say, I will say we were very strategic and intentional in our conversations with like the state and Ajax not to go down the road of proposing an alternative location, because that's their job to do. However, what they told St. Francis Prayer Center initially was that they had to move to this location off of Carpenter Road, off Energy Drive, but like right there at Carpenter Road, because they couldn't get into Buick City. Well, guess what? Well, we were fighting this permanent permit. They actually built a temporary facility at Lee Street. Leith and James P. Cole. It's not a hot mix asphalt plant. From what I understand, they don't have all the same equipment, but it is they have a temporary permit there. We had no control over it as a city because Racer Trust owns the land. They only can operate there 2 years, from what I understand. But the other issue, and there's a neighborhood right. It's not as populated, but there is a neighborhood right there, tucked away, on the other side of the Flint River. And the other thing is, with a temporary permit, there is no limit to the pollution that they emit. So, sometimes campaigns go like this, like, we're fighting this thing because we know if they get a permanent facility off of Carpenter Road, those health impacts are going to last forever. I mean, really. Right. And then the other thing is with the incinerator. And I was talking with somebody who's like, my mom took me down to Carpenter Road when I was 6, and she was fighting that incinerator. And now here I am with my 18-month-old, and now I'm fighting this new thing. And she said, we were told, I get really emotional, guys. We were told that they were not going to be allowed to burn tires in that incinerator. And then they found this loophole where if you shred up the tires, they're called tirelets, and that allows them to burn it. And so I'm still investigating this, but the part of the issue is that once the plant is there, it can always expand. It risks expanding into other areas. So, there are brownfields in areas that are not populated. Probably not as much within Flint, but I don't know. I mean, I didn't want to go down that road because you can get sucked into that, and that just can pull your energy away. If it were a big, I think it would be more controversial if there were a lot of jobs that could come out of it. But at the same time, we want jobs in facilities that aren't going to kill people. I met people who were like, yeah, my husband worked in asphalt and he died, and he was like very young, because even the workers get harmed by it from the fumes. They get COPD is what happens. And so, so they're already operating out of Buick City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And people do get injured and sick from the shops, because working in AC, spark plugs, where I worked, there's so many people when they were doing the powder for the spark plugs and stuff, and the machining fluids from building the spark plugs and the asbestos that was in the building. They paid us good. We got a lot of benefits from it, but it's a lot of health issues that were involved, and a lot of people did die as a result from working just in the factories alone. So that's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, and now I feel like we know even better. Like there's been decades of studies to document this. So we really want to protect everybody.
Trifina, you had a question? Oh, sorry, Eartha.
I was just saying thank you for her dedicated service.
My pleasure.
On the plan.
Privilege, really.
And I know you may not have an answer that's like a solution all based, but I have a 2-pronged question. One is, especially because advocacy and policy change takes time, and sometimes years. And what if you're working with the administrator, whether it's the governor or your current mayor, and you're making leeway, but then there's a transition, like it's an election year and there's a transition, and all of the leadership that was really bought into helping advocate on your group's behalf, like, and now you have no one to hold accountable, and there's a new, administrative leadership in place, and they're against, they're not supportive of the work. Like, where do you start, or what can you do to kind of some of the promises that was made to ensure that the changeover in leadership will still keep those same promises. And then this next question is, I know a lot of times, like, organizations or individuals really rally hard and work hard to elevate a cause or an issue, and sometimes still lose when it comes to trying to change that particular policy or whatever the issue. So how do you keep people motivated and from not giving up or being discouraged? And they're going to do what they want to do. No matter what we do, we're not going to be able to change our elected officials' minds on a certain issue that we really care about. So how do we keep people motivated to continue on the path of trying to make change happen?
Those are great questions. I would say for the first one around the transitions of leadership, there's always going to be that risk, right? Like, you get somebody new in and they just have a different philosophy, or they don't understand the issue. They don't understand the importance to the community because maybe it's an area that they haven't really focused on. So I would say that's where your documentation really comes in. Hey, we've had, conversations going back to 2007, and there's been strong community support for the Grand Traverse Greenway Trail, right? So many neighborhood groups have been advocating for this trail. And with every administration, you have to kind of bring it back up. Like, hey, there's been all these people advocating. One of the challenges, and I'll just use that particular example, is that if you don't keep in the ear of the new person about it, they don't see the urgency. And so it's really important to keep elevating the issue. And that's where all your documentation comes in. Hey, look, these are the conversations we've had with past leadership. These are the promises that were made to the community. These are all the times we got super excited and we thought there was going to be movement. We want to make sure you don't let us down, right? Because we put a lot of energy into this. This is great for our community because it's going to do X, Y, and Z. You just kind of have to make that pitch again, but you use all that document. What you don't want to do is have to go back and try to get the information. But if you're documenting your work and your conversations along the way, doesn't have to be fancy. You start a Google Doc, or keep a pad of paper, and you just write it down as you're going through life, right? So it's in one place. Then you're not starting totally from scratch. The second question was about what if you fail? So I can use the Ajax case again. We haven't failed, but we're still fighting it. And we pushed really hard to stop the permit. And we cited everything you could cite. We had we pushed hard for months. And early on in the campaign development, I had a conversation with Michelle Martinez from the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, because she had fought like an incinerator and other thing, marathon in Detroit. And she said, you need to be prepared to lose, because this is how Eagle operates. They are kind of like, I'm paraphrasing here, but they are kind of like a service. They're like a customer service agency for industry. That's how they have functioned since Engler divorced their mission from having to what was it, the public I'm blanking on the term, is like a public service principle. I'm blanking on basically Engler took it out of their mission, and it shifted the way they operate internally. And we've seen this change since that time. And so basically, if they get a permit application, they approve it. So as a community group going in, based on their track record, they almost never stop a permit, ever, ever, which is so frustrating. And so we had a lot of conversations in the coalition about what kind of community benefits we could advocate for. And we had a lot of really strategic conversation about how we go about that. Because if you start to have the conversation with Ajax or Eagle about community benefits, what you're doing is you're releasing the pressure. Oh yeah, we'll just fund that and have our permit, and all you voices can just go away. So we've been very careful to build our list, but also to keep our focus on stopping the permit, because community benefits are great, and that's a whole other conversation that I think we need to be more intentional and proactive about in Flint. But at the same time, ultimately what we want to do is stop people from being harmed, right? If we can stop people from being harmed, we won't need the health clinic as urgently. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's really important that you just be really honest with the people you're working with. This is going to be a hard fight. We may not win it, but the fight is worth it, because if we do win it, here's what we can do. We are also able to shape some of the conditions of the permit, not as extensively as we had wanted, but because of the conversations with the Ajax permit, even though they approved the permit, it has started conversations at the national level about cumulative burden. And so we're leveraging this local case to say, we are constantly going to be fighting this issue if you don't, EPA start using, putting teeth into the Civil Rights Act to say, it says there you can deny municipalities money if they are discriminatory. You got to do that. As much as it's going to be painful, you have to really say, Genesee Township, if you're going to put all your industry near Flint and Mount Morris, we don't have to fund you, right? So you can leverage the losses for other wins, which is not always it's not always what you want, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, your fight is to make the community better, however you can do it. And I think the other thing is just really being encouraging to people and honoring, oh, Tony, you did a great job with that press release, right? Hey, Nayara, you nailed it with that meeting agenda, right? You kept us on track. Ted from St. Francis, great job on the op-ed. You want to keep people's energy high so that when it comes to those times where you didn't get what you wanted, you can more easily regroup. You can celebrate, pat on the back. We got them to extend their public comment period by months. That allowed, there would have been 10 public comments and we got 400, right? So you just be transparent about it, but also just do the best you can to keep the energy high, would be my advice. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but I'm trying to bring the Ajax case into this so people can see how these pieces operate together. And I know I went over time, but thank you.
Okay. One last question. Jane, I think, sent it to me, but I think she may have meant to put it in the everybody. She said, super presentation and great work. How do you keep your partners and the come and go participants aware of where you are in the tactics?
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially with the Ajax case in particular, we had a legal team. And when you have, when you're signed on with a legal team, there's some things that you can share openly, but your strategy you keep close. And so the way we've done it is part of it with having a coalition, we have a Google group, so we can send one email to everybody. So everybody keeps getting all the information. We have a running notes document so that if anybody misses a meeting, there's one document they go to. We have a Google folder where everybody has access to everything. Sometimes it takes legwork, right? There are going to be folks who are less involved. And then you just have to get on the phone or email hey, we miss you. Or we really think this next meeting would be something you'd be interested in. So it takes a lot of that kind of legwork. The one thing, there's a couple strategies we haven't really tried that I'm looking into for future. You can set up a robo-text service or a robocall. So, because a lot of it is you don't want to call 60 people, but if you can contact everybody in a minute, cool, it gets the word out. So I think a lot of times those technologies don't cost a lot of money and the setup time is probably more effort because you have to get everybody like put in there. But in the long run, I think you want to leverage any tools you can to just keep people in the loop. It's unavoidable that you have to continually help bring people back in. Everybody's so busy is the hard thing, and we all have so many different community issues that we're working on. So helping people see when their expertise or voice or allyship could be particularly useful is sometimes the best way. If you're finding people just like can't come to all your task force or coalition meetings, but you really want them and you know that they'd be a great ally, just helping them find where to kind of fit in, I think would be the way to go.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I mean, I know that a lot of us get asked to attend meetings, and the problem with meetings is they're great until you don't have any time to do stuff based off the meetings, and so
and then you come away with like 10 more things to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mona, and we look forward to seeing how things progress with ETM Flint. I know it's going to be it already is such a valuable resource and a partner in the community, and so I look forward to seeing what the future holds. Next week is our last week, and it's kind of a shortened. Yeah, I see Jim in the back too. Hey, Jim. It's a shortened week, so we have a keynote from the CRIM on event planning, and then Neighbor Engagement Hub. I'll be presenting on strategic or multi-year planning for neighborhoods, and then we will wrap it up. And so we're in the home stretch. We're excited. We do have surveys that will be sent out for your feedback. And internally, our little committee that's part of a larger advisory group has been having conversations around future years and what this might look like. Whether it's we definitely want to do in person, and so we're really hopeful that things continue on this trajectory towards endemic and beyond. But there are other things. Maybe this is spread out throughout the year. Maybe there are other formats that we pursue. And so if there are thoughts you have on those types of sessions, be sure to let us know. One way or another. You can email us or put that in the surveys as well. But we will convene for the evening. And again, if you're interested in receiving digital or paper copies of the presentations, you can email me at director@nehflint.org, and I will send that out or get the copies to you.